It was an ordinary morning in the grand courtroom of Judge Marjorie Whitman. The oak-paneled walls and towering bookshelves gave the room an air of solemnity, a stage for justice to be served, or in some cases, distorted. Judge Whitman was known for her sharp tongue, firm rulings, and, to those who worked closely with her, a tendency to judge more than the facts of a case. Her courtroom was her domain, and she wielded her gavel with an iron fist. Today, a case involving attorney Marcus Reynolds had reached her desk. Marcus, a well-respected black lawyer with a reputation for his unwavering integrity, was defending a client in a high-stakes civil lawsuit. The case was straightforward, but Judge Whitman's demeanor toward Marcus had been anything but. Throughout the trial, she interrupted his arguments, dismissed his objections, and leveled thinly veiled criticisms at his demeanor. It was clear to everyone in the room that her treatment of Marcus was harsher than that of the opposing counsel, a well-connected attorney from an elite law firm. As the trial neared its conclusion, Marcus stood before the court, delivering a closing argument that was both eloquent and impassioned. "Your Honor, justice is not about personal biases or preconceived notions," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It is about fairness, impartiality, and upholding the principles that this courtroom represents." Judge Whitman's expression was stony as Marcus finished, her gavel striking sharply on the bench. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she said curtly. "I will issue my ruling tomorrow." The next day, the courtroom was packed with spectators, eager to hear the outcome of the case. Judge Whitman entered the room with her usual air of authority, her eyes briefly scanning the room before landing on Marcus. "This court has reviewed the arguments and evidence presented," she began, her tone cold. While the defense's case was adequate, it lacked the precision and professionalism expected in this courtroom. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his composure unshaken. He knew his case had been airtight and that Judge Whitman's remarks were baseless. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff," Judge Whitman declared, her gavel echoing in the silent room. She turned her gaze to Marcus. "And, Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you reconsider your approach to the law if you wish to remain a credible member of this profession." The words hung in the air like a slap. Marcus nodded politely, gathering his files. He walked out of the courtroom with his head held high, leaving behind a murmur of whispers. What Judge Whitman didn't know was that this wasn't the last she would see of Marcus Reynolds, and the next time they met, the power dynamic would be very different. 2 weeks after the courtroom ruling, Judge Whitman was in her chambers, reviewing a stack of case files. The ruling against Marcus Reynolds had barely crossed her mind. He was just another lawyer in a sea of faces she encountered daily. For her, the courtroom was a place of control, and she rarely questioned her judgments. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Her clerk, Amanda, stepped inside, holding a printed memo. "Judge Whitman," Amanda said, her tone uncertain. "I thought you'd want to see this." Whitman raised an eyebrow and took the paper. As she read the memo, her confident demeanor faltered. "To all judicial staff, please join us in welcoming Marcus Reynolds as the new chair of the State Judicial Review Board. Effective immediately, Mr. Reynolds will oversee judicial conduct reviews and ethical compliance for the state judiciary." Judge Whitman's grip on the paper tightened. "Marcus Reynolds?" she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes, Your Honor," Amanda said. "He's scheduled to visit the courthouse tomorrow to meet with the judges and staff." Whitman felt her stomach drop. The idea of answering to someone she had so openly disrespected in her courtroom was almost unthinkable. "Thank you, Amanda. That will be all," she said, her voice strained. As the door closed behind Amanda, Whitman sat back in her chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. Marcus Reynolds wasn't just another lawyer anymore. He was now in a position of authority, one that included the power to review her conduct as a judge. The following day, the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Judges, clerks, and legal staff gathered in the conference room, eager to meet their new supervisor. Judge Whitman arrived, her usual confidence replaced with a simmering unease. She took a seat near the back, hoping to avoid drawing attention. When Marcus entered the room, the murmurs ceased. Dressed in a tailored suit, he exuded professionalism and poise. He greeted the crowd with a warm smile, his charisma immediately commanding the room. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began, his voice calm but authoritative. "It's an honor to be here as your new chair of the Judicial Review Board. My goal is to ensure that our judiciary upholds the highest standards of fairness, impartiality, and integrity." As he spoke, Judge Whitman's discomfort grew. She couldn't help but replay the moments in her courtroom when she had dismissed and insulted him. Now, as she watched him address the room, she realized how profoundly she had underestimated him. Marcus continued, his tone measured. "Judicial accountability is not about assigning blame. It's about ensuring that every judge in this state fulfills their responsibility to serve justice without bias or prejudice. That's a standard I intend to uphold." His gaze swept the room and landed briefly on Judge Whitman. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of recognition in his expression. But Marcus's professionalism didn't waver. He continued his address without missing a beat. As the meeting concluded, the attendees applauded, many approaching Marcus to introduce themselves. Judge Whitman hesitated, torn between the desire to leave quietly and the need to address the tension between them. Finally, she approached him, her steps tentative. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, forcing a polite smile. "Welcome to the board." Marcus turned to her, his expression neutral but unreadable. "Thank you, Judge Whitman," he replied. "It's good to see you again." The subtle weight in his words was not lost on her. Whitman extended her hand, her usual confidence replaced with humility. "I hope we can work together professionally." Marcus shook her hand firmly. "I have no doubt we can," he said, his tone calm, but with an undertone that left her wondering just how much he remembered and how much he intended to address. The days following Marcus Reynolds's appointment as chair of the State Judicial Review Board were marked by a noticeable shift in the courthouse atmosphere. Judges who had once operated with unchecked authority now found themselves more mindful of their actions, knowing that Marcus's presence signaled a new era of accountability. Judge Whitman, however, felt the weight of his oversight more acutely than anyone else. Every interaction with Marcus reminded her of their prior encounter, and though he maintained a professional demeanor, she couldn't shake the feeling that her past behavior had not gone unnoticed. One afternoon, Judge Whitman received a notice summoning her to a performance review meeting. Though these reviews were routine, the timing left her uneasy. She knew Marcus would be overseeing the process, and the thought of sitting across from him made her palms sweat. When the day arrived, Whitman entered the review room, her nerves masked by a practiced composure. Marcus sat at the head of the table, flanked by two board members. His expression was neutral, giving nothing away. "Good afternoon, Judge Whitman," Marcus began, his tone professional. "This is a standard performance review to discuss judicial conduct and ensure adherence to our ethical guidelines." Whitman nodded, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds." The review started with routine questions about case management and court efficiency, but as it progressed, Marcus shifted the focus to fairness and impartiality in her rulings. "In your recent cases," Marcus said, looking directly at her, "there have been concerns raised about the tone and conduct displayed toward certain individuals in your courtroom." Whitman's breath caught. She knew exactly what he was referring to. Marcus continued, his voice calm but firm. "For example, there was a recent case involving attorney Marcus Reynolds, where the court transcript suggests that your treatment of the defense counsel was dismissive and, at times, overly critical." Whitman swallowed hard, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Reynolds, I admit that I may have been more critical than necessary in that case. It wasn't personal. I was simply trying to maintain order in my courtroom." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "Maintaining order is important, Judge Whitman. But so is maintaining respect. Our role as judges is to uphold fairness, not to let personal biases influence our demeanor or decisions." Whitman felt a pang of shame but forced herself to respond. "You're absolutely right. I appreciate the feedback and will take steps to ensure that my conduct aligns with the standards of this office." Marcus nodded, his expression softening just slightly. "That's all I ask. We're not here to dwell on the past, but to ensure that moving forward, every individual in our courts is treated with respect and dignity." The review concluded without further incident, but as Whitman left the room, she felt a sense of humility she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be held accountable, not by the system, but by the people she served. Judge Whitman returned to her chambers after the review, her mind swirling with thoughts. For years, she had prided herself on her reputation as a no-nonsense judge who maintained strict control over her courtroom. But today's meeting had forced her to confront a truth she had long ignored. Her control had often come at the expense of fairness. She sat at her desk, staring at the courtroom transcripts from the case involving Marcus Reynolds. The words leapt off the page, a stark reminder of how her sharp remarks and dismissive tone had undermined not only Marcus, but the principles of justice she was sworn to uphold. That afternoon, as she prepared to leave for the day, Judge Whitman stepped into the courthouse lobby and found Marcus speaking with a group of junior attorneys. They listened intently as he shared advice about navigating the legal system and upholding integrity in their practice. Whitman hesitated, then approached cautiously, waiting until Marcus finished speaking before addressing him. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her tone softer than usual. "Do you have a moment?" The junior attorneys dispersed, leaving them alone. Marcus turned to face her, his expression polite but guarded. "Of course, Judge Whitman. What can I do for you?" She paused, searching for the right words. "I wanted to thank you for the feedback during today's review. It was eye-opening." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I appreciate you saying that. Recognizing the need for growth is the first step toward meaningful change." Whitman looked away briefly, then back at him. "I also wanted to apologize for how I treated you in my courtroom. I was unfair, and there's no excuse for it." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Judge. Apologies can be difficult, but they're an important part of moving forward." "Do you think it's possible to undo the damage?" she asked quietly, her vulnerability catching even her by surprise. Marcus considered her question carefully. "Undoing the damage isn't always possible," he said, "but taking responsibility and committing to do better, that's what matters. Actions speak louder than words." Whitman nodded, his words resonating deeply. "I'll do my best to show it through my actions." Over the following weeks, Judge Whitman made a concerted effort to change her approach. She listened more attentively, treated all parties with respect, and worked to ensure her courtroom reflected the principles of fairness and dignity she had once taken for granted. Her colleagues noticed the change, as did the attorneys who appeared before her. Word began to spread that Judge Whitman was no longer the intimidating figure she had once been, but a fair and thoughtful arbiter of justice. For Marcus, seeing her transformation was a reminder that accountability wasn't about punishment, it was about creating space for growth and improvement. Months passed, and the courthouse became a testament to transformation. Judge Whitman, once feared for her sharp tongue and haughty demeanor, was now known for her fairness and professionalism. Her rulings, while firm, were balanced, and she had become a mentor to younger judges and attorneys navigating the justice system. One day, during a courthouse luncheon, Marcus Reynolds was the keynote speaker. The event was meant to celebrate the progress made in judicial reform under his leadership as chair of the State Judicial Review Board. Judges, lawyers, and clerks gathered in the grand hall, the atmosphere buzzing with camaraderie. When it was time for Marcus to speak, he approached the podium with his usual calm authority. He began by thanking the attendees for their dedication to justice and acknowledging the changes he'd witnessed within the judicial system. "Change is never easy," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room. "But it's necessary if we're to build a system that serves everyone fairly. Accountability, growth, and empathy are the pillars of meaningful reform." As he spoke, his gaze briefly rested on Judge Whitman, who sat near the front. She met his eyes, her expression one of respect and gratitude. "I'd like to recognize someone who embodies these principles," Marcus continued. "Someone who, when faced with the opportunity to grow, embraced it fully. Judge Marjorie Whitman, thank you for your commitment to fairness and your willingness to lead by example. The room erupted into applause as Whitman, caught off guard, stood to acknowledge the recognition. She felt a lump rise in her throat, not from embarrassment, but from the overwhelming sense of redemption. When the applause subsided, Marcus concluded his speech with a powerful reminder. The pursuit of justice isn't a destination, it's a journey, and every step we take toward fairness is a step worth celebrating. After the luncheon, Judge Whitman approached Marcus. "Thank you for your kind words," she said, her voice sincere. "I didn't expect that." Marcus smiled faintly. "It wasn't kindness, it was acknowledgement of the progress you've made. You earned it." Whitman nodded, her respect for him deepening. "I still have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to the journey." "That's all anyone can ask," Marcus replied. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad our paths crossed, even if it didn't start on the best terms." Whitman chuckled softly. "It's ironic, isn't it? Sometimes the most uncomfortable moments are the ones that teach us the most." "They are," Marcus agreed, "and they're the ones that push us to be better." In the years that followed, Judge Whitman and Marcus Reynolds worked together on numerous initiatives aimed at improving the state's judicial system. Their unlikely partnership became a symbol of what was possible when accountability was paired with grace and a willingness to change. For Whitman, the experience served as a reminder that true justice began not in the courtroom, but in the hearts of those who served it. And for Marcus, it was proof that even the most entrenched systems could evolve, one person, one decision at a time.